on your face when you're moving from place to place. Good morning, good morning, morning, good morning, morning.
Assemblyman Duke.
You know, it's the same thing as in.
No. Have a seat, Assemblyman Baines. Let's set the tone for the rest of the year, please. Assemblyman Duke. Assemblyman Duke, you are addressing your colleagues. This is an August chamber, and I won't allow that. I won't allow that. I won't allow that. Officer, can you please escort him out? Can you please escort him out of this house, please? Kindly escort him out of this house, please. Officers, please escort him out of this house.
Because I elected to be in this house. On what point am I looking for this? What was it? You tell me when I was standing orders that are right.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Tobago Updates Television. We continue conversations this morning in studio, and as you are aware, you're viewing a clip there of an incident that took place in the House on Thursday at the plenary sitting. In studio with us this morning is a former presiding officer, Dr. Denise Tsoifatt Angus, to give her opinion on the matter, especially having the experience of presiding officer, and talking us through what transpired, the do's, the don'ts, what should have happened, what could have happened, and what should not have had happened. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Adanna. Good morning, Tobago and Trinidad and the rest of the world, wherever you're listening.
Right. We're going to get straight into the conversation, right? And just last week when this incident took place, when we came back on set, one of the things we mentioned is that I believe that a robust public education drive should be taking place, or a person should have a personal interest in understanding what the standing orders are, what are the do's and don'ts, so that we could form our own opinions instead of taking sides and saying, well, maybe she was right or he was right or we don't know. So I'm going to start there. We definitely need to have the information so that we can make our independent choices and not be influenced by emotions. And now we have you here in studio with us this morning as a former presiding officer, of course, looking on from on the outside and seeing what transpired. In your opinion, how should this matter have been dealt with? Was it dealt with correctly, or is there another approach that should have been taken? Because we heard from the Assemblyman Watson Duke in his press conference the following day about the situation. So where do you stand where this is concerned?
Well, the issue is not where I stand, but where do the standing orders stand? And the standing orders are clear. Whilst the presiding officer has control and has the responsibility to control the house so that you can have smooth sittings of the house, she does not have the authority to call the police officer and put them out of the house without having a member of the house move a motion to have that member taken out, whether it is due to disorderly conduct or disruptive or persisting in irrelevance, whatever it is, a member in the house should have moved a motion before the presiding officer could go further to say, the motion has been moved, please leave, or police, please, escort him out of the house.
All right. So that is a very clear explanation there as to what should have happened. But let me just ask this here. As you were explaining this to me, it came to mind. In a situation where a member becomes aggressively disruptive and there isn't time for another member to move a motion, what does the presiding officer do? Does he or she, do they still have to wait for the member to move a motion? Let's say a member becomes very aggressive, very rude, very
Yes.
disorderly. Does the presiding officer still sit and wait for another member to move a motion, or how is that situation managed based on the standing order?
She can suspend the house.
Okay.
She has the authority to immediately suspend the house for an emergency, right? Which you suspended the house, and then they could have gone to, she leaves, and any other member or police, if they quite disruptive, then the police could say, well, this is becoming violent or at risk to other members, and they can step in of their own. But she did not have the authority to direct the police officer as she did.
All right.
So she should have suspended the house.
And in this case, the member who was asked to leave or asked to be escorted by the police, is there any type of action that member can take in this situation, or any member at all?
Well, the member can write to have your presiding officer looked into. He can write to the house requesting to send a motion of no confidence in the presiding officer. But I think basically that is where he would have to go with it. But I believe that any presiding officer recognizing that there was such a breach in the standing order ought to come back to the house and apologize. Because she didn't just take away powers from Assemblyman Duke. She took away the powers from the whole house. She disrespected the whole house.
Disrespect is a strong term, but I understand.
It is, because when you take upon yourself powers that the house has, but you have pretty much pushed them out of the way and say, okay, I'm taking over, and you directed the police, you disrespected the whole house, because they were the ones to move the motion to say, have Mr. Duke leave or have him suspended or whatever. So she did not allow them to do their work. She took on the powers of the house.
All right. So how this situation unfolded based on what we saw from the video, what would have been, had you been the presiding officer at that point in time, what would have been your approach? Would you have waited for a member to move a motion? Would you have suspended, or would you have warned the member again? What would have been your approach?
The first thing she needed to do was stand up. She didn't stand. She proceeded to sit and direct orders to Mr. Duke. So she didn't stand and say, I am on my feet, Mr. Duke. I am on my feet, which is the first thing that you do. Okay? So you stand and you attempt to work with the member and say, member, could you please adhere to the house rules? If you have a question on clarity, an issue, are you requesting to rise on a point of order? Yes? So you attempt in every way with your tone also to calm the member on the other side and to give the member the opportunity to say, hey, what do you want to say? Do you want to stand on a point of order? And then you hear how that person would carry on, but you attempt to diffuse it in every other way so that it doesn't get to that point. If you are failing in that regard, while on your feet, you say, okay, members, I have attempted to work with the member here, and he is not, conducting himself in the way in which we expect in this house. I would request that one of you move a motion so that we can have the member leave and continue with the proceedings of the house.
Sometimes we know what we're supposed to do. Sometimes we understand our roles and responsibilities and functions. And I'm not siding with anyone where this is concerned. I'm just putting this in the public space because I like to have balance and I like to approach things from all angles. So we know what we're supposed to do. We're professionals, or we trained, or we have the information that we're supposed to have. But there's a human element, right? How do you manage the human element in this type of scenario? Because sometimes it can become overwhelming. Right? I'm saying as I said, I'm not on anybody's side where this is concerned. What I want to get to is, how do we strike a balance? Let's say, for instance, I remember last year we were talking about are politicians trained in their specific fields? Are they trained? Are they professionals? Are they qualified? Remember, these are average citizens putting themselves up for service. And so they don't necessarily have the type of training. And so the human part of them will come forward when situations are overwhelming or situations are too much or unbearable. Is it that there should be a measure of additional training to provide a support in terms of how do you deal with a situation where you know what you're supposed to do? Perhaps you might not remember at that point in time and you responded to the situation rather than to the protocol of the whole thing.
I like that you talk about training, because as a presiding officer, when I went into office, I sat numerous hours, days, weeks, studying the standing orders, studying the examples that are given in some of the books related to the standing orders, and also went to Trinidad in the parliament for training, brought the parliament to Tobago for training of the assembly members and the clerks and everyone. And we also traveled, for training internationally. So training is not something I took lightly, and at every turn, I would always review. I mean, my standing orders book that I had personally had highlights, stickers, different things. So you become one with it because you are in charge. You have to know your powers. You have to know the limitation of your powers. And when you have it, you understand it like the front and the back of your hand, you will then be able to go in there and have the temperance needed to deal with a house. Okay? And to deal with it in a manner such that you have control, because you've studied it in and out. Being a presided officer is not an easy thing, It may look simple, but you have a whole different set of rules that you have to study. And sometimes it's even harder than some of the other, secretaries or whoever, because you have to study. You literally have to study while you're in there and make sure, that's if you want to be a good presiding officer.
And not just study, based on what you're saying, not just study, but you have to be able to pull to memory what you have studied in an instant.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to pull,
Absolutely.
whereas with another portfolio, you can refer to, you can go back to something, you could read something, you could check, double check. But while you're sitting in that seat, and I like how you said that it is not easy.
No,
because you have to at all times remember, and there must be challenges. In every portfolio that you hold, there are challenges. I am certain, and so here we are now. So this situation has happened. You mentioned that the presiding officer now should apologize to the House.
Yeah.
In moving forward.
Yes.
Failing that, then what? We continue.
I can't understand when you say failing that. Because, you have breached the standing orders. You have made a gross error. And therefore, you just need to come back to the House and apologize for what you've been able to do, that breach. That is so glaring in the standing orders itself. And I think that there has to be discussions between and clearly there are no discussions being taken around the table, because you heard of the committees that are not functioning. Okay? So the presiding officer is supposed to be in charge of the standing orders committee. I don't know if she'll call a committee meeting now that the standing orders, didn't work in her favor, or she didn't work according to them. But those have not functioned in 3 years. You have a House committee, which is led by the leader of Assembly Business, does not appear to have functioned in 3 years. And that is where the House, and the comfort of the House and how the House operates, the leader of Assembly Business is supposed to have a meeting with members of the House on all sides to ensure that the House is functioning to their liking. And also the Public Accounts Committee has not been functioning, which is a committee where you deal with accountability. So it tells you that after 3 years, there's been no learning in the House. There's been no, there's a total breakdown in how the legislature has been run. And I know in the first year, there were a number of instances where the presiding officer was brought into question. But gosh, man, this is our 3rd year. You have to demonstrate that you have at least learned something, that you're continuing to learn, and that is not being demonstrated or evidenced.
In closing, I want to ask this question. I know you said training is very, very important, and you invested a lot in training, whether it was right here in Tobago, whether you went to Trinidad or abroad, to get the measure of training that you needed when you held the position of presiding officer.
And also looking at clips of different parliaments and how these different scenarios are treated.
Right. So in your time as presiding officer, whenever a situation of this magnitude came up, what was your approach? Were you able to adequately and professionally, in accordance to the standing order, have every matter under control while you were the presiding officer?
Well, remember, I would have dealt with Mr. Duke when I was there, and I didn't have a situation such as this. You never let it escalate to something such as this.
This situation, it didn't have a creeper to get to this, though. It didn't build up to this, it just exploded. So when you say you didn't have a situation where this happened, you didn't allow it to happen to get to this, suggests that there might have been smaller instances before it got to this. But in this situation, there wasn't a creeper.
But remember, if you looked at what the first thing the presiding officer said is, let us set the stage for this year. It was in a very aggressive tone. It was in a very challenging tone. It was not, I'm rising to my order in the House, and she would rise and she say, Mr. Duke, you know the standing orders. Do you have a point of order to stand on if you want to say something or ask a question? None of that was done. So as someone who holds the power, you don't go out wielding your power from the start. You attempt. Everyone knows Mr. Duke. Everyone knows who Assemblyman Duke is. Wherever he can steal the show, he will steal the show. You just don't become his puppet in helping him to steal the show. And so what you do is make sure you stand up. You use your standing orders to ask him, do you have a point of order? But you do it in such a voice that it is calming and not adversarial. Once you get up into an adversarial role from the start, there's no coming back from it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angus, for coming this morning and sharing, bringing clarity to the standing order there, and for us to have a better understanding. And I do want to encourage all of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, to familiarize yourself with the standing orders. As I said earlier, that you can form your independent opinion on matters as it relates to the House, the governance of Tobago, so that we will not be taking sides based on emotion, so we'll understand what is happening there. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we end the morning show on Tobago Updates Television, but it's not where we end our programming. We head on over to GMT, which is Good Morning Tobago, and we continue the Beneath the Surface series. So stay with us this morning as we continue those conversations, and as we go, we invite you to help us. Share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be right back.